Take 27.
They said it wasn't a gateway drug. My homie was taking subs and he ain't wake up the whole while. These billionaires stay kicked up, paying out Congress, so we take their drugs. Murder words, who will never face the judge. And we dancing to a song about a bass gone numb. But I seen homies turn gray, nose is draining blood. I could have been gone, I'm 30s faded in that tub. That's Prince, Michael and Whitney, that's Amy Ledger and MC, that's Yams, that's DJ AM. Goddamn, they're making the killing. Now it's getting attention, cause Sarah, Katie, and Billy. But this shit's been going on from Seattle out to South Philly. It just moved about the city and it's spread out to the birds.
That'd be a good one.
Probably not, but what can you do? Do you want to pass it? Yep.
Good, dude.
All right, welcome to the second edition of the Peace and Love podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Brian Corson, the founder and executive director of MVP Recovery. Brian is a licensed social worker, earning his Master's of Social Work degree from Widener University, and is certified in both trauma counseling and relapse prevention. Brian is an addictions professional with years of experience and is also a person in long-term recovery himself. Brian sits on the Delaware County Heroin Task Force and works with political leaders and private organizations across the county in creating effective change that can combat addiction and better support those in recovery. Brian is the 2017 recipient of the Delaware County Heroin Task Force Prevention Award for his commitment to prevention, awareness, and recovery throughout the community. He is also my daughter's godfather. I am his daughter's godfather, and I'm really, really excited to have you on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me, brother.
You got
Appreciate
me.
it. You figure since we were
Find me the
talking about it
topics.
is fifth grade lunch period, Cardinal O'Hara High School, right?
No,
Fifth
grade.
period,
Fifth
ninth grade.
Yep.
Remember?
Yep, it's
All because of Michael Blair. I appreciate that.
thank God for Michael Blair. God bless Kim Blair. You know, if there's anybody who deserves an award, it's Kim Blair.
So no, I appreciate you coming out here and
Yeah, I'm in Delaware County.
this is what we were talking about.
Yep, keep
for-
that. I wanted that
Okay.
piece there.
Okay.
We're in Delaware County. I promised myself many years ago that I would never return to Delaware County, but here I am.
Well, that's how we met. You figured you were a Broomall boy.
Yep.
I was born and raised in the city of Chester.
Yep.
You know, you were from, up Newtown Square-ish and wanted to come down Chester and, pretend like you were from Chester. And then when the street lights came on, run back to Broomall, right?
I don't know if you remember this. I dated a girl from Chester.
I do. I think my neighbor remembers that. you know who I live next to,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely.
Thompson.
Tom, you are now tagged in episode number 2, Peace and Love.
Peace and love.
Nice.
Peace and love.
But no, seriously, when you asked me to be on this, I absolutely wanted to because I support you. The cool thing about Terrence is since high school, you've always been that Renaissance type man, like into everything. And then when you get in things, sometimes you take them to the extreme.
Oh yeah.
And we've all watched the morphing of peace and love.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking earlier about, the school board things. Some people might go to a school board meeting, participate with their community. Other people might just take it to the extreme,
Mm-hmm.
and I've gotten some calls from some friends that we've had throughout the years asking me, Corson, you're a licensed therapist, is Terrence okay? So I figured, look, I'm going on his next podcast, I'll do an assessment,
Yep.
so not only is this, us sitting here talking about the topics, but afterwards I'll have a treatment plan ready to go,
Awesome,
make sure
man.
everything's
Appreciate
okay,
that.
alright?
Appreciate that. That song that played in the beginning, I remember the first time I heard it, the second I heard it, I called you, I'm like, have you heard this? And one of the lines in it, it's my drug dealer was a doctor. And I think there's some of that going on. Like the one thing that I wanted to ask you about was, is there any role for opioids within medicine? Like are there folks that, are there physicians that prescribe opioids to people who have valid conditions that, like, I'm thinking like post-surgery as an example. Is there any place for opioids in society today, or is it just something that, is really pushed by the pharmaceutical companies?
So no, that's a great question, and there's a whole bunch of different layers to that answer, because opioids, the poppy plant, has been around. It was cultivated first in 4 BC in what is Iraq now, but it was cultivated by the Sumerians. So we're talking about something that's been thousands and thousands of years, and it was realized really quickly that it could be used for medicinal purposes, and it could also be used, for recreational purposes. And they named it opium because it was I think it was a Greek word for dream or something, because of that euphoria they realize when they're chewing on this plant. And fast forward, what individuals talk about, I'll hear people talk about the opiate epidemic that's going on. And the thing that people have to realize, it's the opioid epidemic, because that plant that was first cultivated, and that's an opiate, and the pure forms of that is an opiate. Opioids are the prescription painkillers that we're talking about. Opioids is the fentanyl that's killing people every day. Yep. So with that song talking about, my doctor was a drug dealer, I go to a lot of town halls and I participate in things, and I feel like it's human nature to vilify people and place the blame somewhere. And I was at something recently, a summit, where this topic came up, and the DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office is really pressing hard on doctors that are overprescribing in order to financially gain on that. Yep. And there's a really small percentage of doctors that are doing it for that reason. The other, more common, is just out of lack of education, ignorance to the problem. Because what had happened was, I guess, I don't know how many years ago it was, if it was, almost a decade plus, is pain became the 5th vital sign. And so when the nurse would come into you in the hospital and ask you how you're doing with, blood pressure, heart rate, what's your pain level? Yep. What's your pain level? And the directions to handle that was through prescribing medication. Yep. And at that same time, in 1994, a new opioid was created, which I'm sure you've heard of now, Oxycontin. Mm-hmm. And that is the opioid that took this to epidemic proportions. Not epidemic proportions in cities, because as a resident born and raised in Chester, there's been an epidemic in my community behind drugs since the day I was born and way before then. Philly, Upper Darby, places like that, city areas. However, what Oxycontin did was it brought the opioid epidemic into the main line. It brought it into suburbia. It brought it into where people are overdosing and dying in $800,000 houses. And that's what has brought all the attention onto this. But, and going back to your question, is there's a role for opioid medication. There's a role for painkillers. It was invented because people have pain. Yep. But what we've seen now is it's not appropriate for chronic pain. So, Oxycontin, for example, was invented for cancer patients that are near the end of their life. Yep. Because they're just in so much pain that absolutely, to give that. And what had happened was Purdue Pharma, who was manufacturing it, started publicizing and marketing to doctors as a non-addictive medication. And all suddenly I have clients that I work with that were prescribed Oxycontin for terminally ill cancer patients because they dislocated their knee playing, high school soccer. Yep. So that's where this took it to. And what it was ignorance on the part of the doctors, lack of education. Individuals go to medical school, and up until recently, there was minimal education or credits or mandatory classes behind prescribing. Okay. I was just at a town hall last week, Springfield Cares Town Hall, and a doctor shared about, because he was probably in his 50s, and he shared about when he went to medical school, there was nothing behind any education about prescribing medication. Yep. And you figure that's one of their most number one things. So lack of education, ignorance, and then pharmaceutical companies being very deceivious and greedy, and all that kind of came to a head around the same time, and that's what's called this epidemic. Because painkillers, you go in for a surgery and you get cut open, you need to be prescribed painkillers. Yep. But what we're seeing now, and a lot of hospitals are doing it, is why are we prescribing someone 30, 60, 90 days? How about 5 days?
Yeah.
How about 7 days?
Yep.
Come back, let's see how we're doing, because I don't care whether what the opioids do is it's creating addicts out of people that necessarily may not have struggled with addiction with other substances before, because if I'm on Oxycontin or another opioid for an extended period of time, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, I'm going to become physically dependent to that.
Yep.
And that's what's causing all this, and then the physical dependence, leads to other things.
Is it just certain people are predisposed biologically to be addicted? Because when I had my wisdom teeth out years ago, I was prescribed Oxycontin, and I don't even know if it helped with the pain that much, and I didn't feel any need to dip back into that. So I felt like I wasn't personally having any kind of addiction associated with me personally. Was it biological? Is it situational?
So what we talk about is there seems to always be a 15% of our population that seem to be predispositioned for addiction.
Yep.
That DNA, that genetics, that 15% of the population. But what's been going on with this opioid epidemic is it's increasing the numbers, because people that may have in college drank socially, may have smoked marijuana recreationally, may have experimented with other substances but never went down the addiction path, they're getting prescribed because of a wisdom tooth or an injury, and unlike you, they're getting prescribed for 30, 60, 90 days, and they're taking it as prescribed on a daily basis, and they're not abusing it, but their body's becoming physically dependent to it. So they may not have had the genetics to be an addict. This might be someone that was able to have 2 beers when they go out and put it down, but now all of a sudden they're physically dependent to this substance. And what happens is the lack of education and ignorance in a lot of the medical community, especially prior to all the education getting out there, was that person who's getting prescribed that for extended period of time, they're not told that, okay, when you stop this, you're probably going to experience withdrawal symptoms. When you stop this, we need to come up with a plan of how to wean you off this. It's just prescribe it, stop prescribing it. Yeah. And that's where a lot of people have been hit a wall. And what happens is they realize on Tuesday I was taking my medication, I wasn't sick. On Thursday, the doctor cut me off, and I'm experiencing, they talk about withdrawals, like having the worst flu you can imagine times 100. And it doesn't take a rocket science to realize if I take that medicine, I'll feel better. Yeah. So what happens, I start buying it illicitly, and it can be upwards of $1 a milligram for a pill. So say my tolerance is up, I've been on this medication for 6 months, a year, I'm taking 2, 3, 40, 60, 80 milligram pills a day. It's a lot of money. Yep. So we're talking, so what happens is now I'm running in circles buying illicit pills from the street, and somebody tells me, most people, I heard someone share, and it was a great thing, is the majority of people that cross that line from prescription painkillers to heroin, that it's an economic decision. Yep. Nobody wants to be a heroin user. Nobody wants to be using that, but what happens is those pills are too damn expensive. Yep. So someone says, here's a bag of heroin for $10, it's more intense high, and you won't be sick anymore. Yep. And now that takes us to a whole new level of things, and that's what we're seeing going on, and the medical community is starting to catch up with it. And now there's all these things in place, and now it's just so, like Purdue Pharma that we talked about, the Oxycontin, now they just came out to market a brand new anti-addiction to help people with opioid addiction. So can you imagine that you're part of the problem, now you're going to make profits off the solution. Yeah. So, like anything else they talk about, sometimes, you follow the money and you can find where the situations are, happening. But like when you got that wisdom tooth taken out, how many days did you take the oxys?
Like maybe 2.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, some people, like you said, that 15% of the population that is predisposed to be an addict, that 2 days might have triggered something. But what would have been the conversation if you and I were sitting here and you took them for 72 days? Yeah. And that's where people are getting jammed up, because they're getting prescribed it for a prolonged period of time. And if you see research, it talks about that pain medication isn't really even for chronic pain.
Yep.
You know, it's for that surgery, it's for that acute pain to get you through that critical period where you're in agony,
Yep.
and then to get to the other side with, you know, physical, you know, rehabilitation, ibuprofen 800s, whatever it takes, you know.
I was with a congressional candidate earlier today, a guy by the name of Dan David.
Was he on your first show?
He sat at my kitchen table.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I do remember that. I appreciate you dressing up for this one. Thank you. Or just dressing.
I learned.
Thank you.
I
Thank
do,
you.
and then I learned. We were at a retirement community, and we were talking to the residents of that retirement community about a bunch of different topics. And one of the topics that came up was the use of medicinal marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And then that led into a conversation about recreational marijuana. What I've heard is that marijuana is less addictive than opioids,
Mm-hmm.
and would love a little bit of your thoughts around the use of medicinal marijuana, and then your thoughts around recreational marijuana.
So, I don't think that, I couldn't imagine anyone debating that marijuana is as dangerous as opioids. You know, what we're seeing here. So just as we talked about that opioid medication does have a place for people, that it exists for a reason, and there is people that need it, the medical marijuana, the medicinal use of marijuana can have a place too. You know what I mean? Especially when we're looking at two different things. So that extreme, like if somebody, say, can avoid using an opioid and might get prescribed marijuana, I think that's a no-brainer, you know? So it definitely has a place. It makes a lot of sense. But again, it's a huge topic. Like, I can't go anywhere without that question usually being asked in the thing, because it's a real huge topic that starts a lot of debate.
Yep.
You know, and before it used to be like, well, but now it's a reality. You know, and as parents, I think it's a, you know, concern, you know, of what's going on. Like, so the medical use seems to be turning into recreational in states pretty quickly, right? Mm-hmm. And what was your candidate's opinion on the recreational side of things? Just curious.
He said he was a data guy, and
Okay.
he said that now that there's data available, I think there's 5 or 6 states where recreational marijuana is available. He said he would want to look at data that talked about the impact on society now that's become recreationally available, and that his decision on, well, he thought that it should not be a Schedule I drug federally, right? That not that it should necessarily be legal,
but there
federally,
is some medicinal purposes
but there is
for
some
it.
medicinal benefit. And he said that he committed to the audience that he was going to take a look at the data and make a data-driven decision. In terms of the revenue that's brought in, he said, and I think I'd love your thoughts on this as well, he thinks that marijuana is no worse than alcohol in terms of its negative impact on society. And he spoke, and I'm not speaking out of school because he said this publicly, that people in his family have struggled with alcohol, and that has affected him profoundly. So I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but he said it to the old retired people, so I'm sure I can say it on my podcast.
Absolutely.
So that was his thing.
Yeah, I mean, I had read a cool article one time that talked about if the FDA today, if alcohol was introduced today, the FDA would never approve it because of all the negative effects, everything it causes. But that was already tried how many years ago? It's not gonna, nobody's turning back the wheels to it. So whenever I hear that argument, that's always something I go back to. That is somebody talking about that if somebody, you know, tested alcohol and what it can do to people, and, you know, all the negative effects to that, you know, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I always thought that was interesting. But, you know, so that debate is, you know, what's worse, what's this, you know, medically, I think it has a place and it can be used. Now, the recreational thing is what I'm concerned about, because, okay, alcohol, because in the midst of this opioid epidemic, we don't, you know, alcohol is still destroying lives. It's still, you know, causing, you know, so much despair out there. Like, you know, there's so many things going on, but we don't hear about it as much. So when somebody tells me, oh, this is just as bad as alcohol, not worse, that doesn't really comfort me because it's like, well, that's not really a good thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yes, there's people that can responsibly drink, and there's people, what about those 15% that become addicted and what that can cause? Because those 15, people that are struggling with that is, is causing a lot of negative effects currently. But the one thing that I look at, especially talking about your guy being a data guy, is I've never, because when they talk about the gateway drug and people want to argue that, everyone that I've ever met that has used marijuana has not used heroin, but I have never met somebody that has used heroin that has not used marijuana.
Interesting.
So, in my career, one of the things that I've done a lot is intakes, and so I get an opportunity to sit with people, do what they call biopsychosocial, and get your whole drug history, your whole thing before you get into treatment. And we go through your drugs of choice. And as I say, is when we get into that, and this was, I work with a opioid primary population, so everybody coming in was seeking treatment for opioid dependence, and everybody that I did those intakes with, had tried marijuana first. So, where's that gateway drug? What's that have to do? That's just, as we talk about data, that's just what I've seen, my experience. Mm-hmm. My other side of it is, my concern about it is, so I sit on the heroin task force with District Attorney Catty-Ann Copeland. She chairs it, and we have a medical director that sits on it, and he had shared about going to a big conference, and he said he felt like he was walking back to the mid to late 90s and early 2000s as far as the way marijuana is being promoted now. Yeah. And it's being promoted exactly how OxyContin was being promoted, exactly how those opioids, because everybody knows now, it's getting out there, that stuff's dangerous. Those pills are dangerous, and the companies that make it are going to lose a lot of money. Marijuana now is the replacement for that, and they are pushing it hard. Big, huge banquets, big summits, big conferences. And then I had heard, on the back end of things with the recreational, if marijuana starts getting, people start selling that, some of the companies that have the patents on that, almost like going back to the big tobacco. Mm-hmm. I was at one conference and someone talked about, there's vending machines in Colorado that you can buy, I guess, marijuana type items in it. And he said, it took 40 plus years to get cigarette vending machines out of our communities. And look what's happening. Yeah. We're like reverting back. So, I just think it's something to be really careful with, because I think the debate about what's more dangerous, it's a no-brainer when it comes to opioids and marijuana. Mm-hmm. However, it's just, what are we going to settle for? Like, opioids are worse than marijuana, but I don't want my kids smoking marijuana. Yeah, no. You know what I mean? That's the thing. Like, opioids are worse than marijuana, but I don't want my Uber driver who's picking me up not to be on oxys, but to be smoking weed. Yeah. It's just all these things, and I always hear, we hear revenue, and I just sometimes wonder, how much revenue will we continue to get on the backs of people that need help?
So do you think that prohibition actually stops people from partaking? Like, when we had prohibition of alcohol, you had speakeasies, and then you had organized crime really thrive in those areas. And if you think about all the heroin that's coming across the southern border, and you think about in high school, Chrissy wants to know how the podcast is.
Airplane mode.
When you think about does prohibition actually stop? If you think about high school, if somebody wanted to get marijuana in high school, in Cardinal O'Hara between the years of 1995 and 1999, wasn't that difficult.
No.
So,
fair.
It's not, hashtag not fair.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think no, because that's one of the things that I talk is if you're an active heroin user, heroin really isn't illegal. Yeah. You just know where to get it. Yeah. It's really not like you go up to Kensington, Philadelphia. It's an open drug trade market. It's known. It's they're starting to crack down in certain areas and things like that. But prohibition, absolutely. If that's your thing, it's not illegal to you, because you run in a population and with people that are using it, that it's readily available. So to somebody that's not in that world and it isn't using that substance, it might seem like, where would I actually go to go get it? You know what I mean? But once you get sucked into it, all it is it's fueling the crime signal, that sell it. So what is the right question? What is the right answer for it? Because it's like, do you regulate it under government use? Could that make things safer as well as bringing revenue? I don't know, because the question is, who would feel there's a moral question to it too, because people that are using and they're using almost with the stamp of approval by the government. However, we could keep them safer. We're talking about the safe injection sites that Philly might be moving forward with, and it's like we could keep them, if there's an opportunity to test the substance and make sure the fentanyl's not in there so people aren't overdosing and dying, and then when they want treatment to be there. However, it's a hard question, because then as someone that works in the treatment and recovery field, to see somebody that becomes abstinent or chooses a pathway to recovery and is working a program of recovery, to see their life come back, and then to see somebody that's actively using and to have to partake in that, you know what I mean? It's just a shame, because it's like that person can do what this other person's doing, but it's the prohibition, it doesn't help anything, because as we saw, the war on drugs didn't help anything. However, it's all that illegal activity that comes with it, especially from the large drug dealers. And we're talking about, I come from a community that's been ravished by addiction and drugs and the crime that comes with that. How do we stop those things? So I think it's about thinking outside the box. And a lot of people get scared when we start thinking outside the box, and the problem is we can't have a conversation about it. You know what I mean? Because there's probably 10 things in there that I may have said that one person on this side doesn't agree with, so it's like, shh, and then one person on this side doesn't agree with, so let me type my comments, and it's like nobody can have the conversation, and without being able to have the conversation, what the hell can you do? Like, we can't even have a conversation about any of this stuff, it seems like, anymore, unless you're on the Love and Peace podcast.
That's what this podcast is.
I know.
Like
this is filling that gap.
Yeah.
They're talking about a blue wave. I'm talking about the peace and love wave.
Peace and love wave. There's
serious.
a big wave of peace and love
dead
coming.
serious.
Yeah, me too. One of my favorite part of the day that I shot my first podcast. I'm talking to Jesse Civillo, who works for Dan David, and he's become a really good friend of mine. And he was talking about long-term recovery houses and how certain people take advantage of long-term recovery houses, and that the rate of recovery for people who go through those programs is relatively low. And I said, I think your numbers are wrong. I'm going to call Brian Corson. Podcast was over. We're sitting in my kitchen, and I call you, and the two of you were talking some other language, but he was very educated on the topic.
Yes.
You were very educated on the topic, and I think he had an evolution of thought based on his conversation with you. So can you talk a little bit about recovery houses, and I might be using that term wrong, long-term recovery programs that are successful, and then some of them that are out there that aren't so successful. And the reason I bring it up this way is because what you described is how our politics is how all our conversations seem to get. They're getting more and more polarized. Like, there's no and conversations. It's like but conversations. Like, yeah, you're right, but, but you can be right and you can be right.
And then on top of that, villainize. So you're right, but you want these people to do, like, how dare, like, it's like,
not my backyard.
Like, yeah, everyone calm down. Like, the villains, the automatic villain. And that's why people aren't working together, that automatic villain thing, definitely. And that's one of the reasons, again, is, you've been, politics-wise, you're somebody that I like to call and talk to, because, and have intelligent conversations, because I know there's certain topics and areas that you're conservative in, and there's certain topics and areas that you're liberal in. And when we have conversations about it, it's not about what's left and right. It's about what would be best for your community, your kids. What would things look best for? I mean, I know just, on the last couple presidential, presidents, you one side, the other, it's about the policy
Republicans for
and
Obama.
not the people. Yeah, that's what I mean.
I
And that's why, but I like talking to you about that, and because I think that's just so important.
Yeah.
And like you're talking about, I like when you would call me that day, because I got kind of hyped on the phone, so I think your candidate, does he represent Bucks County?
No, Montgomery. Almost all of Montgomery County and a little bit of Berks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I know they were talking about because there's there's a lot of sober living recovery houses up in the Bucks County area, and he was talking about some negative connotation about them from some neighbors' perspective and whatnot. And one of the things like you talk about when people talk about not in my backyard, like when a treatment center wants to open up, something like that, I'm like, what don't you want in your backyard? Like, look at the data. There's not a town, city, community in our state, in our country that isn't being affected by this opioid epidemic. And when we get that not in my backyard, okay, so you don't want a treatment center or recovery house in your backyard, but you understand there's people actively using and actively dying in your backyard. Yeah. So there's people dying in your backyard. And what I see oftentimes is, it's not until it hits home that it wakes some people up with. And that's unfortunate because we don't have the luxury to wait, that luxury of thinking it's not going to affect me. There's people, and from all scales and walks of life, man. Doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter where you're from, how much you make. It doesn't matter what your politics are. People are dying. And to have that mindset. But in the recovery house side of things, there is a just argument because you could tomorrow say, I'm buying that house and open a recovery house. There's no regulation. There's no oversight.
Yep.
And sober living has become a level of care for individuals coming out of treatment because we're seeing the average person goes to treatment approximately 7 times before they can get sober. That's the average. That's what the numbers talk about. And we're talking about an average stay of treatment anywhere from, could be anywhere from $15,000 to, $45,000 for that, typical 12 to 28 days that you're going to get in treatment. So if I'm stuck, I got mixed up in this opioid epidemic, say doctor was prescribing me, I'm taking pills as prescribed for 6 months, a year, I get cut off, I start buying them illicitly, I start using heroin. So now I've been in addiction for 2-4 years, actively using, lose my family, lose my job, lose my home. I'm now partaking in criminal activity. I'm doing things that, I never thought I would do because of being addicted to this drug, selling my body, falling in different things like that, stealing from family. And then I finally kind of get to the point where I need help. So I get into a treatment center, and I get in there for 14 to 28 days. And the majority of that time is to physically stabilize a person because I've been using for so long. We talked about those withdrawals. It's going to take, 7 to 10 days to kind of get out of that. In the inpatient treatment center, we use medications to help you get out of that. So now you're looking at, maybe another 10 to 14 days in there to kind of start building a foundation of recovery of what you're going to do when you walk out those doors. So maybe I'm a 28-year-old person that's been using for the last 7 years, and I walk out those doors after 28 days in treatment, and I go back home. I go back to the same environment I've been using in for the last 7 years. My entire circle is nothing but people that are still actively using, same stressors, same everything. A thing in recovery we talk about is nothing changes. So what it identified was about Oxford houses have been around for decades and decades. That was like the first sober model. It's kind of almost like an AA house. And but in the midst of this epidemic, about a good 15, 20 years ago, they started to really open up here in Pennsylvania. And because people identified those young individuals, they couldn't go home. They had to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So let's the recovery houses, the goal of this was a structured, sober living environment where you live with other people that have the same goal as you to obtain and maintain sobriety, and to push these individuals to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own, like participate in outside counseling, work on the trauma, the different things, take care of their mental health, go to 12-step meetings, participate in sober activities, have a sponsor, different things like that has been seen to be successful to other people in recovery. And they started opening up a lot of them, and not necessarily everybody has opened them up for the right intentions. Or again, people want to vilify. I would say the majority open them up for the right intentions, but out of lack of knowledge, experience, it just doesn't work out the way they necessarily envisioned it, because it's a struggle. It's not an easy thing. So I'm a master level clinician. I've been a clinical director at different treatment centers. According to the Pennsylvania guidelines, when I was a director at my last job, I had to have a certain level of education and experience in the field to be the director. Yeah. To open a recovery house, none of that exists. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, running MVP recovery is a lot harder than when I was running my last treatment center, because MVP is 24/7, 365, that you have individuals living, in the sober living, all the time. So for people not to have that experience can be an immense setup. So again, that's why I got hyped when he called me, because he made it sound like, all these people are opening recovery houses to take advantage of people in treatment. What they're really doing is they're filling the gap, because that huge gap we're seeing, that person that goes into treatment 7 times, in this day and age, there's no guarantee in those 7 times. Yeah. Because your next high might be your last high. Yeah. And that's what's going on. So it's like these recovery houses are saving lives, and those ones that kind of get out of control and there's not much regulation and monitoring structure, yeah, there is a percentage, I'm sure, that just like the percentage of doctors, but there's also just a lot of people that kind of might not know what they're doing. Yep. And so what MVP Recovery had the opportunity to do was 18 months ago, Senator McGarrigle of Springfield here, he passed legislation, he presented a bill in the state Senate to regulate and license recovery homes. Yep. And I think it was something like, it was in the high hundreds, if not making 1,000 different sober living programs in the state of Pennsylvania. Wow. And MVP was the only one that showed up to support this legislation, because there is a lot of guidelines and things in this legislation that we already do that a lot of people do not do, to make it the structured, safe, sober environment that it is, and getting more in the clinical aspect. And if you don't have that experience and that education, you may not even understand what some of this legislation is talking about. But starting and they're taking some time. It got passed. Governor Wolf signed it last December. And in June of 2020, DDAP, which is the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programming, is going to license and monitor recovery homes in Pennsylvania. Oh, nice. So that's now, and DDAP is who licenses and monitors treatment centers. Okay. So now sober living is going to become that legitimate level of care, because they know it's needed. However, without a governing body, it can be like the Wild Wild West. Yeah. So that again, Senator McGarrigle seeing that early on and approaching us, we were able to go to Harrisburg, help with the legislation. It was a really cool experience, but we're really excited about that, because there are so many good recovery houses out there that are making such a difference. There's so many young people in recovery that may not have had the opportunity without going through a structured, legitimate, supportive recovery house. But what do people want to focus on? They want to focus on the nitwits, just like everything else. Just like, we want to focus on the negative. So like when I was telling your guy who called me that right now MVP Recovery has had 73, 74 graduates in the 4 years we've been open, and 88% of them have not picked up a drink or drug since leaving our program. He was like blown away, because nobody talks about the success that has come out of these programs. We want to focus on the negative. There's very rare, neighbors are, saying, oh, we've never had a problem with them, because normally if you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing and living in a community, they don't even know, you know what I mean? They're not even involved. So we hear about the negative, and he was really focused on the negative, and I was glad to be able to turn that around. But having this governing body and to be legitimate and licensed and certified, I think is going to change things big time, because it's necessary. Sober living is such a huge part, man. Like that 28-day model, it's in conjunction. We couldn't exist. We work hand in hand with the inpatient treatment centers, because they do the get them physically stabilized, start the psychoeducation, and then they come from us directly from there. And our program is a 9 to 12 month program, because one of the things that's seen is if you've been using opioids for an extended period of time, year plus, your brainwaves, sometimes they talk about it takes over 6 months to return back to normal. Yeah. So we're yelling and getting frustrated with our 22-year-old son who's back in treatment for the 4th time in 9 months, but this poor kid's not being given a chance, because he's just going away for a couple of days and things are still
nothing changes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hashtag. So but no, so that's what that. So I was glad you called me that day. Yeah. And then I remember going, I told him I can't wait to see the show, and you're like, camera's been off for 2 hours.
Yeah, it was just a conversation. I know. And it was so beautiful to see his wheels turn and for him to get it and have an evolution of thought.
Well, that's so cool, and that's why. So I've been getting involved in the political thing, and I mean all spectrums, because it's about candidates and politicians that are about change and are about listening. So Senator McGarrigle was a Republican senator here from Delaware County. Governor Wolf's a Democratic governor. Worked together to see what was needed, and imagine if there would have been some bipartisan games going on there. This is lives, and that's one of the things when it comes to addiction and recovery and the policies and the funding and everything like that. This is lives. You play around to get a vote, somebody could die. So I don't play politics like that. I was at a town hall a few months ago with Libertarian running for state senate, Dale Kearns, and he wants to put forth this addiction bill that he hand wrote himself. He's really basically, he wrote this bill and wanted a candidate to back it. No one would, so he said, you know what, forget it, I'll run to get it there, because he had a cousin that had died of an overdose. And that's the thing, Libertarian, Republican, Democrat, whatever, we're all human beings, and this is a human being problem. And the one thing is, the politicians I've worked with, like Greg McCauley in Chester County, he had called me and said, can we meet? And we sat down, and he had a notebook and a pen and just said, can you please just tell me about this? And just wrote, he wasn't, because I've seen, other people that want to make policies and not get input from people that are on the front lines. And they make a policy that isn't going to help the situation. And that goes with any topic. This happens to be my expertise, but that goes with anything. Why would you do X, Y, and Z without asking the people that do that every day? And I think that's what makes great leaders, and great politicians. So I've had the pleasure to work with some of them, because the ones that if you're just going to say it to say it and not do anything behind it, that's somebody's kid that might die. It's
horrible.
It really is.
For some reason, I don't know why I have this thought, but I feel like it's an adult problem. How prevalent are opioid addiction issues in, say, high schools?
Well, I know that and in my presentation that I do, we have a number, and I'm trying to think what it is, but it's something like, 400,000 plus kids age 12 to 19 will try, prescription painkillers illicitly for the first time next year, and this was an old statistic.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the things that on the heroin task force here in Delaware County, we're looking at all components of things. So a big thing is, of those 400,000, 1 out of every 3 will get it from mom and dad's or grandmom and grandfather's medicine cabinet. They're not getting on the street, not getting so and so it's and again, one of the things I talk about is community problem, community solution. So maybe you do everything that's right in your house, but that doesn't mean Johnny, who goes to school with your kids' parents, do. And what if Johnny brings that pill to school? And so that's why it's about the education early on, because like you say, what happens is a lot of times we're not seeing negative effects sometimes until people get a little older and you're thinking like an adult issue, but it's starting very early on, and that is the number one gateway to what we're seeing later on. So part of the thing at the Heroin Task Force is about getting rid of old prescriptions. Like you talked about that, Oxy, you got prescribed for the wisdom teeth. So what happens, a lot of people, they get prescribed, say, 30 days of something, they use 4, they save the other 26 because you never know what's going to happen, right? Well, where do you save it at? You know what I mean? It's your business if you want to save it, but where is it? Is it just in your medicine cabinet? Because there that's sitting there, and guess what? The fact that you're not obsessed with it and it might go a year or whatever without it, you're not going to notice if 12 of them are missing. You know, and that's a big thing. So getting rid of your old medicine, making sure it's locked up, and it's funny when we talk about that community solution, all components. We have a realtor that sits on the Heroin Task Force, and people are like, "What do you got a realtor for?" Well, something that was identified that he brought to us was open houses. Springtime open houses was a huge, almost like shopping time for people struggling with addiction. So what it would happen is 2 people would come to the house. One would talk to the realtor, the other one would excuse themselves to go to the bathroom and go through the medicine cabinet. And you hit, 12 houses on a nice Sunday, and maybe 1 or 2 have narcotics in their medicine cabinet. So now he teaches a realtor class for new realtors, and he teaches this to be aware. You tell the individual that's having an open house, would you have $10,000 on your bed? Would you have a loaded gun on your bureau? Because that's what a bottle of pills are. It's a loaded gun. So would you hide that? Would you lock that up? That needs to be locked up too. So that's something that you would never even think of, right? Never even think of. And that's why if we aren't all having the conversation, everyone can bring something to this. It's not just me being an addiction counselor. This realtor brought a huge part to this. I just had the opportunity to go up to Rite Aid Corporation a couple weeks ago. They're working on what they can do at the pharmacy end, since they're prescribed, they're the ones filling the prescription. And the thing is, their thing was like, they know if someone's doctor shopping or abusing, or because there's a new database in that had passed, I think just about a year or 2 ago, where every time a doctor prescribes a narcotic in Pennsylvania, they have to put it in this database. So before, doctors didn't know if you were getting prescribed by 8 other doctors. Now it comes up. So, if someone steals a script, someone does that, Rite Aid has those in place. What their concern was, how about those patients that are taking it as prescribed, not abusing it, but may be physically dependent on it and maybe not even know? What can we do to help them before the doctor cuts them off, before they get to that line? Because that's where a lot of people fall in, because as you talked about, those people that maybe aren't addicts and are taking it because they trust that the way it was prescribed, that everything's okay, and nobody has educated them on the fact that, hey, you might become physically dependent to that. They have no clue. So everybody has to have a part of this, and schools is huge. You remember when we were in school, health class, didn't they talk about smoking?
Yes.
So here's an epidemic. More people died last year of opioid overdoses than in the 10-year Vietnam War. 1 year. Why would that not be a regular topic in health class? Why would that not? There's been pushback from schools when trying to talk about that, because there's parents that struggle. Oh, I just started a school board thing.
What?
Man.
Oh my
God. Oh boy. But I'm saying there's like parents that struggle to go, I don't want my kid hearing about that. That doesn't affect us. And then that makes the way up the chain. Like, what, we used to learn about don't be a litter bug. Like, how can you not teach in health class, not a presentation that comes in once a year and tries to scare kids, but in health class to say pills in the medicine cabinet, talking about that, opening that up, starting to talk about marijuana if in 5 years it's going to be legal. Like that's a huge focus, because in this epidemic, like, what I do for a living is helping the people that have crossed that line to recover, because recovery is possible with the right treatment, the right support. It's absolutely possible, and we see it every day. To cut the epidemic off at the knees is to educate the next generation that's coming up. How do we stop them from slipping like we did.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where it all comes. And then when you get pushback from that, it's a sin. Like, I mean, you know, you of all people should know in your school. I mean, is that being done? Is that something being discussed?
I need to find out. And I go to all those school board meetings, and I've been talking about. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole because I spent like 3 weeks where I didn't sleep, and I read memos of law, and then I had a nice congressman sit at my table, and I was like manic and like. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole about the school board, but May of next year, 2019, we're going to have some school board candidates that need some support, and I'm going to ask everybody who subscribes to the Peace and Love podcast to support those candidates.
And why don't you tell them what school district you're in?
Colonial School
For
District.
those that don't,
Yep.
for those new viewers that are coming in,
Yeah,
haven't been following the train route.
Conshohocken, White Marsh, and Plymouth meeting.
Okay.
And
that's huge. I mean, and it's all about being involved and knowing what's going on. Like, you know, because there might be schools that have that in there. Maybe they put that in their curriculum.
Yeah.
But do we know? You know, my kids aren't like they're going to be going to school in another year or two. Like, I want to get involved and what, but it's something that we have pushed here in Delaware County. We have talked about it. You know, quite. You know, we talked about it deeply. And again, there was a bill that legislation Senator McGarrigle was pushing forth to start mandating something like that. I don't know what traction it got or anything like that. To me, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah. And that's why I get so upset about the politicization of my school board, right? Because education is so important to me personally. Like, I have like a mama bear gene in me. You know, if I feel like you're messing with my kids, I'm gonna go crazy, and I'll come back from being crazy eventually. But like, because education is so important, and politics has no place in things like addiction recovery and things like education. When you see people trying to politicize those things, man, I'm gonna be your worst enemy.
It's
you know,
absolutely, it's sickening. You know, in education, I mean, you know, you're a son of Irish immigrants.
Yep.
Who came here. You know what I mean, and I know everything. You know, knowing your family for as long as I did, who you know busted their ass to put you through and to support you and help you get a higher education, and you know run with that. And you know, and for me, once I got sober. You know, aside from my kids being born, going back and getting my college degree is the, you know, one of the pinnacle moments of my life. Like, because I wouldn't be doing this now. I wouldn't be able to be helping people like I am now. And that opportunity should be given to everyone.
Yeah.
That opportunity should be available to everyone.
Yeah.
You know, whatever pathway they choose. You know, but the opportunity, you know what I mean? If you're not going to run with it, don't run with it. But, you know, those things like, there shouldn't be anyone pulling strings and playing around with that. That's not something you hold for ransom.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why when we talk about that success numbers at MVP Recovery, it's because we're moving from where it's not just sober living, but offering recovery support services, because individuals, the way to maintain long-term sobriety is to enhance somebody's life.
Yeah.
So if all I'm doing is being sober, it's not good enough. What am I doing to enhance somebody's life to get them back into being a positive member of society? I was reading something where Massachusetts used a lot of their money instead of just on treatment, they used it on support services. And like, for example, they had given somebody a $655 grant to get a cell phone, to get a bus pass, to get work clothes. That person has already paid that back double after a month of working in taxes.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing. People don't look at that big picture, and that's where to support people, because that's why we have that high success rate, is the recovery support services. Our people come in, we help them, you know, employment. Like when people graduate our program, they're working full time. They're financially responsible. They're moving forward. You know, they're not just collecting, or, you know, they want to become independent, responsible individuals, accountable for their own life. Going back to school, getting into vocational trades is huge. Huge, a lot of opportunity, because some of our individual great workers, you know, and then clean and sober, the sky's the limit. Yeah. But if we don't give them that chance, like one of the things we noticed was, you know, all these places not giving people an opportunity because they have a petty drug crime on their record, you know, and it's like, we want to say everybody wants to go off about, well, not everybody, but there's a lot of people that talk about, you know, well, addiction's a disease and people deserve a second chance. But then, like, somebody at 19 years old gets a theft by deception charge because they stole their parents' checkbook and wrote some bogus checks, and they have a felony for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
For the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Like, if that's not a setup, I don't know what is. And that's one of the, you know, when we talk about effective change, like a lot of people like to talk about the hypothetical situations and like, and also about like, I always feel like they want us to debate over here about what's worse, pot or this, or debate over here about safe injection sites. And I'm over here talking about, let's talk about that 19-year-old with that felony for the rest of his life. How come we're not talking about that? Because to me, that seems like something that our legislative body could change.
Yep.
But what do they want us to focus on? The hot topic, BuzzFeed issues that gets us all fighting. Because who could not agree on that 19-year-old? Who could not agree that there should be some kind of term limit for that to at least get somebody so they can get a job? Like, the rate of relapse is just exponentially higher for unemployed individuals. And that's why we started the Second Chance Employment Program with D.A. Copeland and the Heroin Task Force and County Council, because people working and people enhancing their life, they have a better chance of recovering. So why, instead of throwing billions of dollars at others, that like look at those services? And that's not just for people that are in recovery, but for people that, you know, come from communities in the city where I'm at. You know, why aren't we offering, you know, more services and support to help people get out of these holes, man? You know, and you know, like somebody is born in a kind of in a rough situation in a rough area and does what they saw modeled after them, and then they have a felony for the rest of their life. Yeah. And you want to know, like, well, you had the same opportunity as everyone else, but like, made a mistake.
Yeah. That's the other thing that I talked to Dan about when he was on my podcast, was criminal justice reform. Like, non-violent drug offenders, like, you think about like a 19-year-old who has a 2-year-old son, right, that had a pound of weed and gets a sickening long jail sentence and like separated from his kid, and you know, it's just not right. No. You know, and it's part of that war on drugs that you talked about earlier. It's like, guys, that didn't work. Right? Like, mandatory minimums, okay, maybe they're right for some things. Non-violent drug offenses, in my personal opinion, should not have mandatory minimum. There should be, maybe you have to go to prison for a little while, but there should be a support system, right? Like, people should be given a second chance. And
I think, and you can come from all ends, because say if you're not a bleeding heart and you don't believe in that, and you come from the other end, fiscally, it's more responsible to try to get the person help and to put them in the prison. You know what I mean? So it comes from all ends. So it's like, you know, someone doesn't have to agree with this, but you can't argue that, you know, dollars and cents to it either. Yeah. You know, and you know, and there's just so much. But what is going to be done again? Because it just seems like all rhetoric, man. Yeah. It seems like constant rhetoric.
Everybody should.
And it seems.
I was at this beautiful retirement community today and spoke to so many Democrat residents and Republican residents, and 99% of them were very, very nice and asked very good questions of the candidate. And then there's one woman who popped her head in and she goes, I heard you guys are Republican, so I just wanted to hear what lies you're telling these people. I'm like, man, I promise I choose my words carefully. I try to tell the truth. I care deeply about you. I think you have value as a human being. And she was basically like, F you. And I'm not going to yell at this 80-year-old. I'm not going to get into a debate with this 80-something-year-old lady.
I think it's crazy that it seems like, you know, local politics are getting sucked up in federal politics. Yeah. Local politics is different, man. Yeah. Like, you should know your state rep. Yeah. You should know what he's about. You should know because you know what? That park around the block from you, it's either renovated or it's not. Yep. Like, there's houses falling down or it's not. Like, you have access to things or not. You have a struggle or an issue and you go to the office, he either returns your call or not, whether he's a Republican or a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, that federal level, I mean, for, you know, all intents purposes, it's more entertainment. Like, it's like, you know, like they're, yeah, exactly that. But I just mean, like, it's like people you don't really know. Yeah. But I'm saying to bring local level, and I was considering him local level just because he's out here in the communities doing it. Yeah. but to bring local level politics and to try to get it all dirty like that, it's just like, no, like you should know the people. They should be community members, and it should be like, what's best for our community? How can people argue what's best for the community you live in? Everybody should want, safe streets, good education, low taxes, you know what I mean, and resources and respect and dignity for everybody, regardless of, what side of the tracks you're on, and that's something, we ignore certain, communities and like being, in the city of Chester and, not getting resources, being ignored and different things, but not really stepping up for effective change because didn't really, this guy or that guy, or it's the same thing sometimes, so what's...
Yeah. And especially in my community, like, it's so funny, like, TJ's bus is supposed to come home at 4:09, right? There's been a ton of overdevelopment in our area because people want to expand the tax base. Well, that's led to huge traffic issues. So instead of my son getting home at 4:09, he's getting home at 4:49.
That's
right? And like that's
a big quality of life issue.
Huge quality of life issue. Now they're adding another 75 townhomes adjacent to this Abolition Hall, which is a very historic part of the underground railroad. And I talk to my Democrat friends and neighbors, and I'm like, guys, this isn't right. Like, you should talk to our candidates. And they're like, well, you're right about all the issues, but like, I'm a Democrat. I don't vote for Republicans. Well, I'm like, I'm a Republican. I vote for Libertarians. I vote for Democrats. I vote for the people. Like, I do my homework, and it breaks my heart when somebody says that, because I know Republicans I don't like. I know Democrats I don't like. I don't know that many Libertarians. I think I like all the Libertarians personally. But it's like, we have to get out of this polarized mentality, right? Because what's going to happen is like what's happening in my community, where there's all this overdevelopment. We now have sinkholes popping up all over the place, right? Because we're close to the Schuylkill River and like,
oh, seriously?
Seriously. Another sinkhole popped up today. And like, roads are closed, right? So now there's overdevelopment.
So what's that, water underneath of it? Is that what that is?
Yeah. And then like, big hole in the ground, right? And if this one sinkhole that's in Plymouth Meeting right now was 50 feet the other direction, you're going to see buildings collapse. And like, I'm trying to talk to people, and they're like, I hate Trump. I'm like, all right, dude, whatever. Like,
like that your house being sucked in a hole does not have anything to do tied to him. Like, that's it. I mean, I know for me, like, I can't, I couldn't imagine going into a polling booth and just hitting a lever for one side only because that side has elephant or
jackass.
You know what I mean? But that's what I mean. Like, you should do your homework. Yeah. Like, what's this guy's policies? This guy, and a big thing for me is, who's talking the talk when it comes to, addiction and recovery support and resources. Because everybody, or who's putting in the action, because everybody's talking the talk. Everybody. But, who's putting in the action. And I'll tell you, that's one topic that I have seen for the most part that has that bipartisan, because it's affecting everyone. I mean, the last presidential debates, the Republican and Democrats, every candidate spoke about it. Yep. So, to see that there's a human, face to that, that's what's so important. My concern is, and one of the things we're doing at MVP is, my concern is because we're only hearing the negative data and the increased deaths and everything. My concern is people that aren't in the recovery world are going to start saying like, okay, well, nothing you people are doing is helping this, so let's stop funding, let's pull from this stuff, because nobody's talking about the success stories. I mean, you had a, U.S. congressional candidates, campaign manager who had no idea of the good stuff we were doing down here. It's like, so that's why we're really trying to get the word out there, because one of the things people have to remember is it took so long to get into this epidemic. It's going to take years to get out of it. But what's going on now is things are being put in place for the first time ever, like access to treatment, recovery resources, legislation on the recovery houses that hopefully 5, 10, 15 years from now really implements real change, but it's not something that's going to change overnight. Yep. And that's why it's so important to back this in with the education in the schools. Yep. But on a local level, like, I think it's so important to know what your candidates are about, what's going on. Like, I think it's irresponsible and lazy just to do because of a political affiliation. And I'm
It's just
hoping
amazing.
that our generation that's coming up is looking at that, and I'm not too confident they are. That's unfortunate. That's why I like talking to you about it, because we can talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And Dan's opponent, Madeline Dean, to her credit, has been both candidates, as it pertains specifically to the opioid epidemic, have been really strong supporters on finding a solution.
Good, because I'm voting for her. So
Yeah, well then, this is the last time we'll see. The last topic that I wanted to cover this time, and I want to do this again, because I think this went pretty well, hope for the holidays.
Oh, cool.
So that's coming up soon, and talk a little bit about what Chrissy developed, and Chrissy's your wife, and maybe a little plug for that.
No, absolutely. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because any viewers that want to participate or volunteer or donate, we love it. So this will be the 4th annual Hope for the Holidays. So the past 4 years, 4 years ago, Chrissy, we came up with an idea about giving back. You know, we always do an outreach programs and whatnot. And one of the things was Kensington, Philadelphia is ground zero for the heroin epidemic. That's where individuals from Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, when individuals are going to purchase these substances, 90% of the time they're going there. So one of the things was we're bringing an outreach to Kensington, Philadelphia, and a lot of people are like, oh, why are you going to Philly? It's like, because, it's Philly, and there's people from Philly there and everything, but all the surrounding Philadelphia counties, that's why we're getting so hard hit in this opioid epidemic, and that's why each county that's closer to Philadelphia has more overdose deaths because of that. So that's ground zero for that. So one of the things was, what can we do as a recovering community to get the word out there that recovery is possible? And there was members that had come through our program that talked about being out on the streets in the winter, and one young man talked about, someone giving him a blanket and how that meant a lot to him. And Chrissy had a friend that, had overdosed and died in there, and she really, how can I give back in her name and different things. So one of the things we talked about the community was, what if we went up there and gave out care packages? And so the MVP community was, ecstatic about it. And at the time, we probably had about 20 people in our program. And so what we did was we had a little holiday party at MVP and put together care packages with blankets. Because we asked individuals that have been out there, what are some of the necessities that you need? And socks was a big one, winter socks. So socks, gloves, hats, blankets, and then what we would do is put treatment resources in there, a number, a card with an 800 number, maybe plant the seed, maybe someone gets to that point of desperation where they're ready to call that. But the hope that we talked about was everybody would write an inspirational letter in there and talk about, hey, somebody cares about you, somebody's here for you. And so we did that the first year. We brought up about 40 packages, and then to jumpstart to last year, we brought up 415 care packages and gave out 250 coats. Nice. And did this in about 3 hours. Everybody gets one package, so that was how many individuals that we were able to affect change with, and it's a really neat thing, because the people that are recovering here at MVP, those that feel comfortable going up there with 6 months clean and sober, go up there and help hand them out. And so we'll go up to the individuals, because there's a lot of outreach programs that really help the homeless out there, but we'll go up, we'll give the package, and their head will be down. They're like, hey, what church are you from? And we'll be like, no, we're in recovery. And we'll have people that say, I slept on that bench last year. And also their head gets up, there's eye contact, and what ends up happening is we usually go to Hope Park in Kensington, Philadelphia, and what ends up happening, there's some tables there, and just people sit down and we talk, and talk about, I was where you were at, you can get through this, you can do this, and last year was really cool, because what happened in Kensington, Philadelphia is the railroad tracks is where everybody would, they called them encampments, and people lived down there, people shooting up down there. It was just something that, like, you would read in a book and not think it would exist in our society. And we had gone down there a couple of times, and like with Chrissy, I said, look, this, it was just a bad scene altogether, and it was heartbreaking. And So they fenced up that area because it was so bad.
Yeah.
It was between SEPTA and the city of Philadelphia, and all that did was push the homeless and the addicted further. So last year they were just under bridges of main streets, and cops driving through and everything is just part of the deal. We're sitting there. There's probably about 75, 80 people just under this bridge on a main street, whatever that main street is, right there at Kensington, and sticking needles in their neck, in their feet, right there, man. And that's just the life. And we had the opportunity, we talked to a couple people, and we got 4 people in the treatment last year, right there, got them in the car, drove them to treatment. It was a Sunday afternoon. 2 were from Ridley Township here in Delaware County. 2 were from Springfield Township here in Delaware County, and 1 was a 20-year-old pregnant girl. And so, like, that was just the, not only did we hand out those packages, but we were able to help get those people into treatment. And this year, we had a young lady that's in our female program, and she talked about being down there and about people coming down and handing things out, and she had thanked us for doing this. And we want her to hopefully speak at our event just to let people know, like, this really, helps people and affects people. And the hope for the holidays, if anybody that's listening out there goes to the Facebook MVP Recovery page, like our page, and you can follow us, we have the event on there. And what we did this year, we made it easier. We created an Amazon registry. So anyone that wants to donate goes to Amazon, Hope for the Holidays 2018, and we have all the items that we're including in the bags, and you can order it right off of there. So what we're going to have a huge holiday party. We're still figuring out the venue. We're hoping it's going to be at Newman University, but we're still working out the details. We're going to have a huge holiday party on Saturday, December 8th. It's going to have Santa Claus, food, fun, games, and that's where we put together the care packages. And then the next day, we're going to District Attorney Cadion Copeland volunteered to utilize the Delaware County Heroin Task Force van, and she's going to come with us, and we're going to bring that up with all the packages and then hand them out up there. So we're really, excited about, getting it up there and seeing, how many people we could reach this year, and hopefully, just start the conversation. Yep. You know what I mean? I mean, it was a miracle to be able to help those 4 people get into treatment, and I had, nothing to do with it. It had to do with MVP community members that are clean and sober, that their primary purpose is to help the next struggling addict or alcoholic, and they were there and reached out. Like, one guy knew someone in our program that wasn't there, so they got him on the phone. And he's like, I've been clean, 7 months. And the guy in Kensington's like, if you can do it, I can do it. You know what I mean? And it was really cool. And it's just about not giving up on people. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because there was a meeting today that someone had talked about, and someone said, well, how much are you really helping individuals by doing that and this and that? And it's like, those 4 people, the things that we don't realize, when we're in our addiction or anything in life, is when we do negative things, there's ripple effects to it. And of the other people we hurt, and some people we don't even know. And when we're in recovery and we're doing good things in life, there's a ripple effect from that. So we see one person that may have recovered that has 5 years sober. You don't see that person's parents. You don't see their kids. You don't see the people that they affect, because now they're living in a stable, healthy environment. How do they bring that out? How do those kids affect other people in life? Like, there's that ripple effect that I feel like, and this is just across the world now, especially our country, that people just forget. Like, helping others and treating others with dignity and respect, how that can continue to spread out. Yeah. And that's just, every time I turn on that damn TV, is just missing in almost every, absolutely political side, and it's just implementing in everything. Yep. And it's like, that's just causing those negative ripples. Like, I don't know what it's going to take or how many damn podcasts it's going to take. I think 4. Four.
So
for
Dan
effective
David,
change.
Brian Corson.
It's got to be Kieran Woods.
Jesse Savillo. Jesse's going to be on.
Oh, okay. Okay.
My unicorn.
Okay, nice.
So,
by the time you get to Mike Blair,
Kim Blair's going to be on. What you just said, I tell my kids all the time, when you do good things happen. When you do bad things happen. And that's how I think we're going to end this second podcast, and I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. No, I hope that we can do this again, man.
Yeah, we definitely will. It'll be good. I hope I turn the camera on.
My man.
Okay,
good stuff, brother. Love you too, dude.